if Jesus is truth, or says the truth will set you free, then you can follow the truth wherever it leads, and it should lead you to God.
Elijah got his bachelor's in philosophy at Covenant College, bachelor's in psychology at Covenant College, a master's in apologetics at Biola, a master's in science and religion at Biola. You're a studier, Elijah.
Oh, I am.
But actually, the reason that he's on the podcast today is because of a beautiful feature film, a documentary film that he directed and produced, and it's called Send Proof. It's an honest look at the evidence for healing miracles. And I just finished the film today, and I got to give you compliments, my friend. It's a beautiful, wonderful, amazing film. So thank you for your hard work there. I know the challenge of making feature film, but every project is different. And you certainly, this one's interesting because you are a pretty central, important character in the story. And I loved your choice. I'll just say it right off the bat. I loved your choice of putting yourself in the film. It was bold and it was awesome. And it was really helpful for a viewer to be sort of on this journey with you, looking at this story through your eyes, and to be able to sort of judge your expressions and say, okay, it was clear that you were authentic and that you were truth seeking. And my trust sort of built as we went through the story. So congratulations on that choice, putting yourself in the film.
Well, thank you.
Let me ask you, what was the sort of backstory to deciding to make this film? And do you have a background in filmmaking, or was that like completely new for you?
No. I was interested in the search for miracles. I cover this topic in my film deeply because they've always been something that I wanted to know more about. Are they real? My mom was sick. She sought healing from healing ministers. There's a part of me that goes, I don't believe this. There's a part of me that I'm in the Christian tradition, and so I believe, well, it's possible. And as I study at the academic level, I struggle with my own faith. You can't do philosophy as a major and not struggle with God's existence. And at the same time, I thought, well, if I saw miracles, I would be interested, or it would build my confidence. And so I went to a church where I saw them, and I started working for that church, and then started working for a senior pastor at another church who we prayed for people, and we saw things that were miracles, and then he left the faith. And so it's just been this journey of what is going on with this topic. Is there evidence for this?
I'll just say there's not a lot of, being a filmmaker myself, I often start watching films and I'm watching through the lens of the craft. And there's this period of time where you go through whether or not the suspension of disbelief is going to happen, and you start to get into the story or not. And that happens all the time with me, where I'm just kind of like just judging, looking at the craft of the film. But it didn't take me but seconds because of your awesome opener. Your opener had that skepticism built into it so beautifully, and as a believer myself, growing up in the Christian church, it was just like instantly connecting to me. Like, these are some of the same skepticisms that I've had, and I know all my friends have had, and you don't know what to do with them. You wrestle with them, right? But and I'll just say to our audience right off at the outset here, there probably will be some spoilers here. Nothing that will keep people from wanting to see the film, and I highly recommend it. but I am going to go into specifics in the story. So I was really engaged by that opener. Kudos for that. And honestly, I was riveted throughout the film. 2 or 3 times I had tearful moments, and it was moving. I got to say, it was moving. Particularly right in the beginning where, I'm just getting to know the characters, getting to know the premise. And you went into a bit of your backstory, and it was kind of a punch in the face when you it described what some of the things you went through as a child, coming up in, being raised in a Christian home, but then the period on the end of the sentence was that you were beaten for hours, and that you endured that level of trauma. And so right at the outset, I'm like, it literally took my breath, and I got tense all of a sudden and thought, this person that I assumed somewhere in my psyche probably had a similar upbringing to me in the Christian church obviously did not have an upbringing that was similar to me. And so I became pretty engaged pretty quickly. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on what that journey was like from your childhood into teen years and ultimately into adulthood, where you've clearly had to continually deal with this trauma and PTSD.
Sure. I think one of the things I did not realize from being beat so much is that it was abnormal. And when it started going into, I would say 11 or 12 when it stopped. So I just thought people spanked kids. And there would be blood dripping down my legs. And I think I went into shock a few times. And it was tons of blood. I would get so cold from it. I would just shake. And so for me, at the same time, I struggled with God's existence because of that event, because my mom, who taught Bible school, is the one doing this. And God's not doing anything to stop it. And maybe that was the bigger piece for me. And so I think, and this ties back into my opener, I'm trying to show the craziness of Christianity to my audience at first, to a church or to people who go, I don't see how crazy this is. But we swim in a pool of insanity where people can con people, and then, moms can beat kids and still be leaders in churches. And for me, it really drove me at a very young age to ask really deep questions. Because, if you're abused by a highly emotional, irrational person, it pushes you toward the rational side. And so I think out of that, 12 and 13, I'm, asking my pastor about evolution and stuff of that nature to just go, well, how do I know this thing's real at all? How do I know Jesus is alive? And he would give me apologetics books. But I think, there's good that can come out of every bad situation. And I think it really pushed me toward having an intellectual life at a very young age. And I was really blessed in that I grew up in the Presbyterian church. And so they're very intellectually driven. And I feel I could, if Jesus is truth or says the truth will set you free, then you can follow the truth wherever it leads, and it should lead you to God. And you didn't have to be afraid of questions. It was so ingrained in me at a young age that I feel really blessed by that.
What was the relationship like for you after 12 years old? Did did you, how long, I mean, I'm sure you kept wrestling with this situation. Is your mother alive now?
Yes.
And what, this is jumping into the deep end, but what kind of relationship have you had with her since you've had an adult life? Have you talked about these topics at all, or with her?
Yeah. I would guess she has borderline personality disorder, which is, I'm not sure if you know about this. It's called I love you, I hate you is the best way to describe it. Is either you're fulfilling their fantasy and they love you, or you're not, and it's just rage. And
wow.
And so I, for years, tried to invest in her psychological healing. I've offered money, go to therapy, or send books, and because I wanted the best for her, but I think she just chose such a toxic path over time. I had to say, I can't talk to you anymore. I think her way of controlling is a type of emotional manipulation where she tries to push your buttons. And so, like, I'm a very lax guy, but she would push me to the point where in a 10-minute conversation, I would just be like level 9, level 10 anger. And it would eat at me. And I developed PTSD from the abuse, and I just had to say, I can't let people verbally abuse me any longer. And it took me a long time to even understand what verbal abuse was. And to go, that's what's happening in this situation. And so I told her, if you can stop verbally abusing my dad, I'll come back into relationship with you for 6 months. You've got to treat him with respect. And she chose not to do that path.
That's hard. Mm-hmm. I thought it was very courageous and bold to include that backstory, and obviously very central to the story because of this conflict that you've grown up with, trying to wrestle with who is God and how does that person exist in the midst of this. What other ways did PTSD manifest as you dug into these deep thoughts and explorations in making the film? And by the way, how long did it take you to shoot and make the film?
About 5 years. It took a long time, and I think it was the consistent overcoming of fear. Like, how do I put it? So let me describe PTSD, and then I'll explain how it affected the film. So I want you to imagine you're being beat, and you're in a lot of pain, and so the only thing you know to do, like, you're out of control, like you just zone out. You think of baseball or whatever, or talking to your friends. And what that does when you zone out is there's a part of your heart that freezes in time sometimes, so that it's like when you in the future have traumatic experiences, it's like that frozen part is experiencing it at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so this part of my heart is very rejection avoidant and fear-based, because any negativity could re-trigger, oh my gosh, my world's going to fall apart. And so as I'm making this film, I have to go before people who can reject me, who can hurt me. Hiring was difficult. Firing was difficult. And I had to grow exponentially through the process of saying, all right, these fears are irrational, and to learn to care for that part of my heart without letting it make me make bad decisions. And so I think this process took way longer than it would a normal filmmaker. But I'm at the same time, I'm learning film for the first time.
Yeah.
I'm learning good storytelling, and I have to go back and refix parts, and then expose myself to skeptics. That was super scary. When you say my whole life is given to Jesus, and then someone comes along and says this is a fairy tale, that's exposing yourself and your foundation to someone, and I think it's healthy to do. It's just emotionally exhausting to do.
I can imagine, and your interviewing skills were fantastic throughout it. I could say sort of director to director. You, in the face of that type of rejection, because you have plenty of characters in the film that are skeptics, that have a deep-rooted belief. They have years of building their case on their side or whatever. You still had questions that drew out authenticity, and you were able to continue on with this sort of steady demeanor, which I thought was just fantastic. So I have to say, I do believe that the film was divinely inspired. Speaking of facing challenges in the film, one of the moments I was so gripped by, even though it wasn't very emotionally charged, was you revisiting that pastor friend who had fallen away from faith and having that conversation with him. Tell me what that was like. This was someone who's your friend, and now you see things very, very differently from each other.
Yeah. It was challenging. I don't feel like we got to go to the level of depth I wanted. I wanted more like what happened, and the hard part in that relationship was, you can talk about things intellectually, like why does someone not believe in God anymore, and they can say this evidence, and I can say, well, this is the evidence I believe. But sometimes when these schisms happen, it's hard to reconnect at a heart level. And I think that's one of the sad parts of my life, is someone I deeply care about. But we're just that heart connection's not there. And so I think we love each other to the best we can, and neither of us have rejected each other, but we're definitely in different places in life.
Going back to a bit of the origin story about what made you decide to take this topic on, were you always a fan of the documentary craft, or what came first? Did you look for a topic, or did this topic eat away at you and you just said, I have to make a film about this?
This sounds a little bit cheesy, but I went to a ministry school in Northern California, and the goal was to pray and ask God to do stuff that only God could do. And so I would just pray, God, give me a strategy to transform our culture. And this thought would come to mind. And so, at a practical level, I think documentaries way better a medium of sharing information than, let's say, a book for changing heart. Like, if you read books to relay information, you watch film to communicate emotion. And I wanted to put those two together, and it seemed like documentary is the place to do that.
Well, it has built-in social proof, right? Because you're looking at these other people's experiences, and you're saying, "What do I identify with?" There,
And so, and I love good documentary. If I'm watching Netflix, those are some of the things I'm pulling up. I think documentary is powerful a means of communication. And because I move in the Christian tradition, I think, why are we not making more documentaries? There's so many moral issues to wrestle with these days. And I love the medium.
Speaking of wrestling, you did a wonderful job balancing this film, and it really was a wrestling match between ideas. And I'm going to give you a lot of compliments throughout it because I really loved it, and I don't give compliments easily. Did you have a fear going into it that people would sense you had an agenda?
I did. Anyone who makes a Christian documentary is aware of how many Christian propaganda films they are. And I had that fear or concern. And I also had a concern that, what if I don't find anything? And so I think what makes the film good is I push myself in several areas. First of all, I'm bringing in the skeptic. I read something by Michael Moore, and he said, if you're making a film on a topic, make 80% or something like that. I'm making up a number, people you disagree with, if you want to take people on a journey. I thought that makes sense to me. And secondly, I thought I will marry the truth and tell it as clean as I can. And that's the only way to not make propaganda, is to marry truth in the process as best you can. And so I think that is how you avoid those things. And I think that's what helped the film ultimately.
Bill Johnson had a line towards the end that I thought was awesome. I actually wrote a similar line. It stuck out to me because I wrote a similar line in a book that I recently launched. He said, I can entertain you with a story that's not true, but I can't change you with a story that's not true. Do you think that there is something spiritual that happens when truth is relayed in a story?
I definitely do. We know we can alter people's lives with propaganda. The Nazis did that. But when it is reality, I think it is spiritual. And there's this quote I love, is that good art reflects culture back to itself. And so I think good artists, they take the good and the bad of culture and hold a mirror up. And that's what moves people. And so I wanted to do that. And so as you were talking about my intro, I'm showing the crazy, I'm showing the uncertainty, and I'm also showing, maybe there is some evidence for this stuff. And so I'm trying to get a full picture of reality in it.
That must have been a significant faith step for you to embark on this 5-year journey without knowing what evidence you were going to actually turn up, and being committed to truth the whole way. You're just like, hey, wherever the chips land. What kind of kept you going throughout that? Were there moments that would be like, hey, this is going somewhere? Or
I think it's the prophetic word I got when I started. In the movie, Sean Bowles gives me a prophetic word, and he tells me my name and birth date, and he's like, God's commissioned you, go make the film. And so that led to the Kickstarter. But since I believe God had given me a prophetic word, we ran out of money, and then we took our, I wouldn't say entire, I would say 95% of our retirement income to finish it out, and then had to bring on an investor. And so it was, I thought to myself, I get one life, and if I feel this confident God has called me to do something, I can't stop.
Wow.
And so that, I don't think a lot of people get that level of clarity in their lives. But I do feel marrying it was so important to completing it. And
Wait, just unpack that for a second so that I understand it. When you say marrying it, what do you mean?
Well, I believe in marriage is that, it's for life. And so when I say I'm marrying a film, is that I will complete this no matter what.
I see.
And there comes this point in making any film where you have to go through that process, and you're exhausted. It's not working. You don't even enjoy the project anymore, and it won't get done unless you go, I'm giving my best each day or whenever I'm working on this project.
I totally understand what you're saying, and it reminds me of like if something's not really yours, it's just you're not even, it's not even fun anymore, but it's not necessarily, it's yours to steward, but it's not there to just bring you emotional satisfaction on any level. So that's pretty cool, and that was a powerful moment in the film when Sean the prophet said what he said. And of course, you have the bit about Peter Popoff in the beginning, which is like builds this skepticism. How skeptical were you in that moment? Or was it just something deep in your heart that said, no, this is true, what he's saying?
So I received a prophetic word to start this film. I was at my house. I live at Bethel in Reading, which is known to have traveling ministers come through and give prophetic words, but it was a Tuesday afternoon. I want to say Tuesday, could have been another day of the week, but it was an afternoon midweek, and my friends text me and say, Sean Bolts has called your name out at church. Get here now. And I go, really? And then they say, he called out Elijah and Allison. And so I drive to the church. He tells me my name, my birthday, my wife's name, her job, all this stuff and much more. And while he's telling this, first of all, I'm feeling myself bend over, which we attribute to the power of God. Like, this is not something that's normative to me. But at the same time, I had studied James Randi before, and I thought about the Peter Popoff thing. And so I prayed, God, give him things that I wouldn't otherwise know. And so he gave some details I wouldn't otherwise know. And the next day, or that night, I'm going, this is amazing. This is the thing I wanted to do. But there's also details on Facebook. Lord, please give me some more confirmation. And so the next day I'm working out with my friend that morning. And he says, where do you want to go eat breakfast? Let's talk about this prophetic thing that happened to you. And I told him a restaurant in town called Corbett's. And as soon as I say that, I get a word of knowledge, which is I just see a picture in my mind's eye. And there's this other place called From the Hearth. And so I go to From the Hearth, and there's Sean, and I get to ask him some details and some stuff. But it is a lot different than, let's say, researching miracle claims where there's before and after evidence. It's logically possible he tricked me. There's people online who say, yeah, look at all this, let's say, correlation between prophetic words that he gives. There's other people who say, I experienced, or correlation between the internet and the prophetic words he gives. And then there's other people who say, I experienced some correlation between stuff I've posted online and stuff he's given, but there's also other details. And so I think living in a digital age, that's something Christians are going to have to wrestle with. But I do think that in this process, I know God has called me to make this film. And so I live toward that end. But that is, when you get words that accurate, those are legitimate questions to ask. And I have wrestled with this epistemologically, and I've just told myself, I will marry integrity. No matter what way this goes, I will tell the truth. And I think that's what the world is looking for. They're not looking for people who are never deceived. They're looking for people who rightly adjust themselves to truth and reality and develop character in that process. And so, yeah, it's probably the weirdest part of the film, but I didn't want to make a propaganda piece. And I've had people say, well, you should take this out if you want to convince skeptics. But that's not filmmaking.
No.
That is my journey. I can't edit that out. It was such a big part of my life that I have to put it in.
Yeah, I really appreciated it being there because you were such a central character, and because we were on this journey, there is a natural curiosity about what is driving you to dig into this topic. And that was a big moment that kind of showed this thing that was sort of injected in you, you know, as like this calling or this thing that you had to respond to. And like a big takeaway that I had from watching the film is you are pointing out the positivity of looking for evidence, and people need that permission to feel positive about looking for evidence. But the other thing, you know, the tension there, the dynamic tension that I also felt was that it does not remove the need for faith. If there was absolute proof readily available, then it's just like, well, that would be like convincing in the natural, right? But the more that I watched your film, the more I saw, yes, there is evidence. God is not against evidence, but that there's still need for faith and belief, right? Is that how you felt in watching it and in making it, or is it different than that?
Well, something similar, certainly. So, as you mentioned earlier, I studied apologetics during making this. And so I was working through the hard epistemological questions of how do you evaluate evidence? How do you deal with faith? And so for me, I really wanted to push this envelope of the church since the Great Awakenings has divided being spiritual from thinking critically. And that just wasn't the case in early church history. And so when we go back in time, you will find intellectual giants right after the apostles die. So this is 100 AD. So John dies in the 90s, 100 AD-ish to 130-ish, writing the emperors debunking their gods. They used Greek logic to defend the Trinity and to iron that out at Nicaea. And so Christianity has always been evidence-based. We are the people who birthed science. Modern science came from Christians. Francis Bacon, father of scientific method, was a Christian. Kepler was a Christian. Copernicus, Galileo, all were Christians. And it was all because they believed that Jesus said the truth will set you free. And so when it comes to evidence, I think there is a lot of evidence, especially when it comes to healing miracles. That's where it overlaps way more than any type of supernatural claim about the modern day gifts. You maybe with the demonic, there might be something left over, but prophecy, think people get dreams. So there's not going to be any evidence of a dream left over. However, I think what good evidence does is it shows the church that God has done something in the past. We know this, therefore we need to pray for the sick. But it doesn't replace the need to go and take risk and talk to people about Jesus or pray or give prophetic words. It just shows you, all right, now this is really real. You're without excuse. And I want to push people there.
You're talking about risk, and a thought that jumps into my brain is, how did you manage that risk? Your wife is in the film for a scene. How was that for both of you, this 5-year journey? How was marriage during that time?
Oh, man. Hard, super hard, because the learning curve on this film was so steep. And we thought we'll get this done in 2 years, a year. And so for her, I had to take odd jobs during the time, not enough income's coming in. She's questioning, why don't you provide for me? And at times early on, it felt she was adversarial to it. I think she went through a process where she died to everything. Giving up her retirement was killing all of her idols, is the best way to describe it. But she is a different person from this. And it's ultimately bonded us together. But when I say you have to marry something and not let go, I experienced that in the film and between us. And we just chose each other, and we chose love. And it was hard, very hard.
Well, I'm sure she's very proud of you for finishing it. And obviously it takes both of you to get through that.
Yeah.
So pretty awesome. You talked about needing to go back and change things or fix things in the story. How much did the structure of the film change or evolve over time, over these 5 years?
I think the structure of the story was fairly clear early on, but what evolved over time was our skill level, and then cases would fall apart. So if you gave me all the medical records to a healing case, and I knew this would become a miracle, to get this into a peer-reviewed journal, I've got 2 years ahead of me. And so what would happen is we would get cases. We don't only research the records, we also go into the medical literature to see if there is a similar case that looks very naturalistic and kind of throw those aside. And so the first few cases I sought out, I can still say I think these are miracles, but they would not have been good for what we were trying to do. And so when you fly out somewhere, you can dump, $5-10 grand on one interview, and then it's gone. And that's hard. And you've structured story around that. And so you have to go back and go, all right, let's get something else, and then go, how does this fit in? And that changes everything.
As filmmakers here on this end, and we have a few that follow this podcast, there's questions about the business end that are helpful for people. So you did do a Kickstarter. That's how you funded the film. And this is common for a lot of film production stories, is the money runs out. Talk to me about that. How long into the process did the money run
out? 2 years. 2 years.
And so then you're forced to, as you said, you're married to it, so it's time to put your money into it.
Right.
And then that ran out, and then you got an outside investor?
I think I maybe could have kicked it across the finish line, but for the marketing side, I needed an outside investor.
That was my next question. How is it being received? And I know it's maybe early on, but what are you doing for marketing? And do you mind talking about your strategy there at all?
Yeah, we're trying to do podcasts, do as much organic as we can. We're building a funnel, and oh goodness, there is some good distribution stuff out there. I want to say indie distribution. Indie Film Hustle has a distribution e-course I would recommend.
I know that one, yeah.
But we're trying to go indie style. I did not want to take this to market because I already had Kickstarter backers. And so that's something you have to think about as you're starting your film. If you have Kickstarter backers and you have deliverables, you either have to change the way you do deliverables so that someone can buy it. Like if you took this film to Netflix and they want it to be a Netflix original, you can't fulfill something to your Kickstarter backers. And so it creates these integrity issues. The same for sales agents. They don't want something that you have to fulfill later. And so those are some thoughts that you're going to have to wrestle with as you do this. As far as marketing's concerned, I think having items to sell on the back end, I have chosen to, at this point, that I'm trying to drive people to Vimeo, and when they make a purchase, have items on the back end. We're still building the cart for that, but I think that will allow us to do Facebook ads. And I think that's a big deal when it comes to marketing is if you're renting something for $3, you can't do enough Facebook ads to make a profit.
Right.
And so you have to think, how does this interact with Facebook so that I can sell things on the back end? So we put an e-course on the back end that's $100 and something bucks. We'll probably do some merch. And so what that will do is you can rent stuff cheaply or whatever, and then get people in the funnel, and with extra options to buy, a percentage will. And so thinking through those issues is super important. But I would recommend, as you do this, if you're going through this process, reading anything you can by Russell Brunson he's the creator of funnels.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best material on the market for thinking through funnels.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good to see that you're sort of on the forefront of the thought process on how funnels work and modern marketing, and how to monetize it in this sort of modern way, which is great. How's it been received so far?
People love it. So far, just tons of positive review. And I think because I was very balanced, even skeptics will tell me, I don't believe in God, but I cried, or this is something, someone will say, this is something I could share with my unbelieving friends who really live in a secular space. And so I feel that's the biggest win for me. I know that there's a percentage of Christians that will just clap their hands no matter what, but I wanted something that, I showed it to my lawyers, and they're very skeptical, and they're like, I think miracles might be real, and that's a win for me.
100%. Yeah. As long as the film production process was, and challenging as it was, what's your feelings now about filmmaking? Do you want to make another film, or have you sworn it off?
I do, but I want to take a rest.
Yeah.
I think now that I've been through it, I know how to cut the fat and shrink that process down. You've got a good team. You've got your equipment chosen. You know all the marketing stuff. And so you've built a reputation as a good filmmaker. And so I don't want to throw that away, but as I'm marketing this, it's pretty tiring. And so I do want to take a pause.
Yeah, you have to get out of bed and live with a project for multiple years, and that just is not easy, no matter the topic. Talk to me about your team management or leading a team, that these are people of this craft. So you never were necessarily under the delusion of you'd shoot it yourself or edit it yourself. Did you edit the film? I didn't check any of the credits.
I did not edit the film. I thought I could what I think you can do, and I think this is something I learned from church world, is you can build prototypes. And there's a difference between editing something and which is really hard versus getting together your story in some type of order. And I think I was able to take people through this. I did the same thing with animation. I would storyboard how the animation needed to go, although I never attempted animating. But I think this is the tension of the filmmaker, especially if you're the final leader, director, or whatever role you want to call yourself, is that at some level you have to know enough to know what good quality is. And at the same time, you can't get too far into the weeds. And so I think that's the place for e-courses. Is I would recommend the aspiring filmmaker to go through some type of e-course on the craft that you're having done without necessarily doing it yourself, so that you can, that 10 hours that you go through that e-course will help you in the future.
You were starting to say that the courses, a course for a filmmaker would be a valuable thing. Tell me why you believe the course would be a valuable thing.
Well, I learned so much from e-courses. So, and there's great sites. You can do LinkedIn Learning. You can do Udemy. You can buy one that's already made. But what they do is they help you to watch through the process. And so if you have to hire someone, it gives you the skills you need. Sometimes I would hire people and pay them to go through the course because you're helping them become the type of filmmaker they want to become. And I often notice that I saw exponential improvement. And I think that's why we made such a good film, is we invested in training people that I thought were already good and take them to the next level. You learn so much on the fly through little YouTube clips that most people don't have a conception of everything that needs to be done, especially your editor, your cameraman. It's super helpful to take people to the next level.
Yeah, well, we've certainly seen that here in just investing into our team, and it's win-win, right? Because they're growing, but then the end result of what we create is just that much better. So that was very smart on your part to do that. I just want to say again, as we wrap up, that the film is super worth watching. I want everybody to go check it out. It's called Send Proof. The director, producer is Elijah Stevens. He did a fantastic job. And I just want to tell you, there was a little moment. I hesitated to tell this story, but I'll say it anyway, because I don't want to draw a lot of attention to myself. But maybe 3/4 of the way through the film, or just past that, 7/8 or something, I started getting this feeling like, oh man, I wish that he would, he's making this case for evidence, and it's just so awesome. I wish he'd use this example of doubting Thomas. I was like, oh, maybe he still will. Maybe I'll give him that suggestion and he'll still edit that in. And then I get to the end of the film and you have this amazing end moment. And I just had a weepy moment there, because it just really hit me that you were feeling it to the level that you were. So just a kind of a personal anecdote there where I love the way that you wrapped it up. So again, fantastic job. Wonderful film. People can go to sendproof.com to watch this. Is that the best place for them to go?
That's the best, for sure.
Okay, awesome. Well, I can't wait to stay in touch with you and see where this goes. And I just want to thank you as a fellow filmmaker, storyteller, for putting in the level of effort that you have, your commitment to truth, your commitment to authenticity, and to make a palatable case for evidence in a world that, thinks of believers in a certain light. They think of us in a certain way. They have a paradigm, and you really worked hard to offer new perspectives. And I just thought you did a great job. So hats off to you, sir.
Thank you so much.